Shabbat Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. Since this past Wednesday morning, I have struggled and wrestled in my mind, in my heart, about whether or not I should talk with our congregation today about the results of the election. There is a part of me that says if I don't talk about the election, I will come to regret it. There is another equal part of me that said that if I come to talk about the election, I will regret it. I have always resented the Palestinian narrative of the Nakba. Nakba is an Arabic word which means the catastrophe. And I don't like the Nakba for two particular reasons. The Nakba is referred to as the day that Israel became a state, May 14th, 1948. And it is commemorated in the anti-Israel world, primarily by the Palestinians and some others, in a day of absolute mourning. So allow me to share two reasons why I have such a problem with the Nakba. The first reason is it's false. It's not true. The implication that because Israel was formed as a state that the Palestinians did not get a state is convenient, but 100% fake. In fact, from both the Balfour Declaration and the UN partition plan, the Palestinians were afforded an equal-sized state to that of Israel. But it was rejected in 1947, rejected in 1948 by force. It was rejected from 6 neighboring armies. And it was rejected again in 1967, and in 1973, and in 1982, and in 2000, and in 2007, and in 2020. So the idea that there is no Palestinian state because the Israeli state has been formed is false. That's my first major problem with the Nakba. Here is my second major problem with the Nakba. And it is the focus of what I will share with you today. The problem I have with the Nakba is that inherently in what is my happiest and proudest and most celebratory day in modern history as a Jew, a day that was a dream for 2,000 years, a day that I could only have wanted my ancestors to hold my hand for literally, to say it has happened, the miracle occurred, that inherently in the foundation of the state of Israel and what is our greatest day, I have created your worst day. That's the notion of the Nakba. That in order for me to have a moment to celebrate, it must mean you mourn. And the solution for those who commemorate the Nakba is the inverse. The inverse of saying, for me to have a day where I declare my statehood would be a day where you lose your statehood, and it would turn into our day of mourning. And that is a horrific paradigm. Do the British call July 4th their Nakba? Is there any other place in this modern world where our success means that another group collectively and largely has to mourn? The only examples I could come up with were when good defeated evil and right defeated wrong, like on D-Day and others. And the select few who commemorate D-Day as a day of mourning are those who still champion Nazism. So how can we have a moment that celebrates our success that causes mourning to another? The reason that I am sharing my thoughts on the Nakba today is because on Wednesday, countless Americans woke up, and some did a victory dance, some did a celebration, some had a sigh of relief and enjoyment as the results of the election crystallized, and others began to mourn, to weep, to tremble, and to be scared. And while not a perfect analogy, and while not necessarily apples to apples, the idea that for one party to win an election, regardless of the party, causes the other party to tremble in fear and mourn is a broken paradigm in America. It's a dangerous path for us today and forward. Now, it is no surprise to the majority of you which direction I wanted this election to go. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. And that's okay. Today, my support unequivocally is with the Trump administration so that they can succeed. And I'll share more about that in a few minutes. Our country's needs and our need for collective unity is far stronger than my individual wishes and desires. But with that said, I want to share a few selective streams of consciousness that aren't necessarily coherent or woven together, but are some immediate reflections from this time in our country. Now, some of you might say before I share them, how dare the rabbi share his political views from the bima? First of all, why should this night be different than any other night? Second of all, I was born a human being long before I chose to become a rabbi. And inherently in my human being, I was born with thoughts and beliefs and free will and desires. And when I chose to become a rabbi, I didn't choose to squelch those individual beliefs and thoughts just so I can cater to a community. Along those same lines, I have never fancied myself a milquetoast rabbi. I have no interest in being someone who delivers pareve entrees to this congregation on a regular basis. I'd rather be a person who shares my beliefs and my passions, and that you can agree with them or disagree with them with kindness and with respect. And I will aim to do the same. Woe to me, woe to us, woe to our world, if I am a rabbi who all of you universally agree with week after week after week. I don't ever want to be that rabbi on any topic. So I welcome your pushback. I welcome your disagreement. I welcome your applaud, and I welcome you standing shoulder to shoulder. My only request is that you do it with respect and kindness, and I will aim to do the very same. So with that said, here are a few disparate, unconnected thoughts that I will share with you. Number one, I will never understand and I will never forgive those people who chose not to vote for Kamala Harris to punish her for the Biden administration's support of the Gaza war and Israel, especially those in my home state of Michigan. The reason why is not because I'm mad at people who have a differing view. It's not because that I think those who wanted to vote for Trump or Harris shouldn't. But I think those who adopted that methodology to punish her and not vote for her is exactly the same methodology and thinking as those people who attacked Israel on October the 7th. And allow me to explore and explain. When October the 7th happened in Israel, there wasn't a lucid, reasonable Gazan who could have thought that Israel wouldn't respond to that moment. But they were blind to thinking of what that response and consequence would look like. But they didn't have any problem dancing and singing Allahu Akbar and kissing the ground as they spit on hostages in Gaza. And then days, weeks, and months later, they had no problem crying to United Nations, to World Opinion, to any reporter who would dial into their empathy and say, look what they are doing to us. If we make decisions without thinking of the consequences, then shame on those who do that. And that thinking, that methodology for people who chose not to vote for Harris for that reason is just as ridiculous as those who invaded Israel on October 7th and thought little about what the consequence would be. Next, I welcome with open arms the future Trump administration's support of Israel. I have no interest in accepting that support of Israel if it is based on a fueled hatred of Arabs and Muslims. I want to be clear. I welcome the future Trump administration's support of Israel. I have no interest in that support if it is based on hatred of Muslims and Arabs. If it is based on curbing radical Islam, I welcome it. If it's based on punishing all Islam, I don't. That said, I have welcomed and championed the Biden administration's support for Israel over the past 4 years. With that said, I have no bandwidth anymore for those who have equated Israel and Hamas and put them on equal footing as if they are the same, and those who have put an equal moral playing field between Israel and Hezbollah, and those who have abrogated and ignored international law when it comes to Israel's right to self-defense. I have no interest in that. You know, we have had a long history of presidents who have supported the U.S.-Israel alliance. In my lifetime, that included Presidents Reagan and Bush and Clinton and Bush and Obama and Trump and Biden. And all of them have done fantastic things for the state of Israel. All of them, regardless of which letter follows their name. And all of them have done some things, not many, but some, that have not been so great for the state of Israel. That must continue. And this leads me to point number 3 that I think is one of the most important things that I can share. And I have believed this far, far beyond this past election. Turning Israel and Zionism into a partisan football is more dangerous than a nuclear Iran. And there are those in the world beyond political figures. There are pundits and there are rabbis who have shared from their bima for not the last 2 years, not the last 4 years, the last 10 and 15 years, that only a Republican administration cares about Israel, or only a Democratic administration cares about Israel. And that is A, ridiculous, and B, dangerous. And we must stop turning Zionism into a political football. We are Zionists in America, not only as Jews, but as Americans, because it's in our strategic interest as Americans. We are Zionists in America because our values with Israel are overwhelmingly aligned. We are Zionists in America, and we support Israel with incredible aid to the tune of almost $4 billion a year, because $3.5 billion of that money is spent for jobs in America. And those who aren't familiar with that need to be, and that's why it's in our interest. So the radical left and the crazy right who say we should stop our aid, all they're saying is we should stop $4 billion worth of investment for jobs in America. Is there anything more ridiculous than that? Is there anything more ridiculous than divorcing yourself from the only democracy in the Middle East? Is there anything more ridiculous than divorcing yourself from your staunch ally that shares similar values and has an incredible strategic interest for us? We cannot moving forward, and we should not have in the past turned Israel into a political football. Of course, people will have different views on what Israel should do and could do and what our best support is as Americans. Of course, we're welcome to engage in that fruitful and healthy debate, but support should be unconditional. No different than parents who love their children, but who give different kinds of advice and support. The love is unconditional, and we need to do better at that. Along those very same lines, we as a nation must do better at doing what the Torah asks of us and being more of an umpire nation. We need to be much better at calling balls and strikes as we see them, regardless of the batter in the box and regardless of what team is at the plate. We have done a poor job in being umpires. We have ignored strikes down the middle because it's in alignment with our political party on both sides, and it has taken away from our honesty meter, and it has taken away from our authenticity meter. And until those who are staunch and proud Democrats can point a finger at things that Biden and Harris had done that were wrong, and until those unwavering Republicans can condemn behaviors by Bushes and Reagans and Trumps, until that can happen, we are going to become more divided and less united. Just a few more. One area where I give President Trump and his team tremendous credit, and it proved to be fruitful, is that often they do a better job at saying what they think. And we, others who disagree with some of those views, have done a horrible job at saying what we think, for fear that there might be a few in our world that just might not sit right with them. It's that kind of thinking that would allow me to talk this week about Abraham's journey and not necessarily about the things that I think we need to address. If I'm doing my job right today, there are some of you who are squirming in your seat, and I'm proud of that. Not that I take joy in making you squirm, but I take joy in sharing ideas that not all of you agree in. But we have to be better at defining our borders. And when I say borders, I'm not talking about with Mexico and Canada. Allow me to share an analogy that has absolute consonance and resonation with this very point. Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove is a classmate of mine, a dear friend. He's the rabbi at Park Avenue Synagogue, and he and I both wrote books in the last year, and we're on this book tour in the last month and the current month. And recently we were on a panel together in White Plains, New York. And he said something that I radically disagreed with. Everything else he said I agreed with, and I have not stopped thinking about it. And the more I think about it, the more I am convinced that Elliot is wrong and I am right. Here's what he said. He was asked a question about a character in his book who's an amalgam of people who are friends with his kids, who go to college and who no longer believe in Israel's right to exist. And the moderator asked Elliot, well, talk to me about dialogue with that person. Talk to me about how you engage with that person. And Elliot's response, which is a fair response, a good response, a worthy strategy, even though I radically disagree, is our tent must be big enough to include even those who we don't agree with. In general, I agree with that. And he said our tent must include those who don't believe in Israel's right to exist, like this fictional character called Maya, who is an amalgam of different people in his kids' lives. And that's where I disagree. When I wrote my book, I put in there something that I still hold fast to today, 4 principles. If you cannot agree that Israel has a right to exist, if you cannot condemn unequivocally the acts of October 7th without any explanations, aboutisms, or permissions, if you cannot demand the immediate release of every single hostage taken illegally from sovereign Israel, and if you cannot obey by the idea that Israel has a right, if not a duty and an obligation, to defend itself against this attack and future attacks, if you can't agree to those 4 things, I don't want to talk to you, and I don't want you in my tent. I disagree with Elliot on that. And I think we have made a mistake by saying, even if you don't want me there, you can come in. I think we need to do a better job at defining what allows people to come in and not. Now, Elliot's approach, and I don't want to sell him out here, is I'll never convince her if I don't talk to her. And by the way, if there's ever a person I want to do convincing on behalf of the Jewish people, it's Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. That's how much I love him and respect him. But I disagree with his strategy. I think by allowing people who disagree with our right to exist an opportunity to make their argument, we fuel that argument. We've done a disservice allowing people to just share crazy ideas that aren't founded and say to them, that's okay, that's acceptable, and I think it's wrong. Along those same lines, there are two major rabbinical schools in the conservative movement in North America. One is in Los Angeles, one is in New York. A few years ago, a gaggle of rabbinical students, about 50 of them, wrote an open letter condemning Israel in the most harsh terms, in which they denied many of the basic facts and rights for Israel and Israelis. One of those two schools said, we are not going to address this. They are entitled to their opinion. They can share what they want. We might agree or disagree, but so they can be. Another school said, no. Our job is to educate these rabbis. Our job is to share with them right and wrong and facts and details. And our job is not limited to the classroom only. And I think that second rabbinical school got it right, and the first one did a colossal error. And that is indeed my point. That if kids want to protest on campus, okay, you can protest on campus. But when we have given them a voice and a license and a platform to make claims that are false and wrong and allow them that place for the notion of free speech, we have done what has proven to be a crime. There is no genocide happening in Gaza. And I am tired of hearing about it. I'm tired of it because if Israel wanted to commit a genocide in Gaza, it would make things much easier. We wouldn't read a list every single week of every Israeli soldier that's died if they wanted a genocide, because those soldiers are dying so that there isn't a genocide. And just allowing them to rate the right to say what they choose and to protest things that are not factual should not be acceptable anymore. And when those were interrupting speeches saying there's a genocide happening, what I want my elected officials on both parties to say is, no one celebrates the loss of life, but Israel has a right to defend itself, and there is no genocide happening. That's what should have been said. That's where we grow. And by allowing all these different voices, we have fueled platforms that traffic in untruths. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. And we must make certain delineations of who can come in the tent and who can't, because I think people want it. What we saw on the actual political front was interesting. People didn't really vote down ballot. People voted how they thought they should. If they were in Arizona, they voted for Gallego and Trump. If they were in North Carolina, they voted for Josh Stein and Trump. What does that tell us? That tells us that our constituency is much smarter than we give them credit for. That people can walk and chew bubblegum. And that if we're able to define things that matter to us, they too can define things that matter to them. And we have to do better. Because I believe that the United States and many constituents aren't hoping for milquetoast. They're not waiting to hear what they want to hear. I think they're craving for genuine leadership. And they're craving people who will say things that might make them uncomfortable, but will make them think. And I think we can find that place better. And I think it's a lesson for all of us. I have one more point before a closing statement. Jill Stein is a horrible person. Lastly, and I mean this from the depths of my heart, from the most sincere part of my being, I would much rather eat a heaping bowl full of crow. I would much rather be wickedly wrong about every hope and thought I've had than I would in the small sliver of satisfaction that might come days or years from now in saying, I told you so. I am rooting for the president-elect. I am not rooting against him. He is not the president I wanted to govern now, for many reasons. But he is the president of me, and he will be the president of you, regardless of how you voted. That is how democracy works. And I'm not rooting against him. But at the same exact time, I will use my voice and I will use this pulpit to call out any moments that I think are not consonant with Jewish values and traditions. I've done that before, and I will continue to do that again. And I would do the exact same thing were the results going in the other direction. But at the same time, as a rabbi who sat in the East Room when the Abraham Accords and the peace plan were unveiled by President Trump, one of two rabbis in that room, as one of only two conservative rabbis, along with Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove, who were in Jerusalem when the embassy was opened, I too will call those balls and strikes and celebrate the things that are worthy of that celebration. And I think we all can do that same too. What my real hope is that we don't turn into a people that are so divided that we have our own Nakba. That we become a people that through some group's success becomes a moment of another's mourning. That's a recipe for a failing nation, regardless of what side wins. It won't bode well for us today or tomorrow. We have a lot of healing to do as a nation. And I hope to be one of many that will walk around with the first aid kit and offer those bandages for healing where and when and how we can. That's going to take a healthy dose of humility. It's going to take a steadfast voice on morality. And it's going to take a really, really full glass of optimism. I extend my hand to yours, regardless of where you stand or where you are, to hope for that same dream. Because there's nothing else we can do but to hope for something better. In every match, in every contest, there are winners and there are losers. There are victors and those who are defeated. Sometimes we celebrate that victory, and sometimes we mourn in that loss. But may we just mourn the loss and not the future. May we just celebrate the victory and then commit to being a partner in hope for tomorrow. Because then we can continue to say that this amazing experiment of the United States is something we're all invested in, all a part in, and all rolling up our sleeves to make the dreams of our ancestors become our inherited reality. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will, and let us all say amen.